our bodies, unless we fiddle with them, our bodies are so clever. They're so clever at telling us when we're full, when we're hungry. We've evolved to be able to do that. The problem we have is we live in a food landscape that is tricking our brains with these heavily processed foods that are soft in texture, that we eat 50% more quickly than the equivalent unprocessed foods that are energy dense. But the other problem is many people do different kind of yo-yo dieting, and that totally changes that set point in our brain of where our brain thinks we're full and where we think we're hungry.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Schulweiss.
And I'm Jen Giammo.
And welcome to another episode of Everybody Talks, the podcast where we explore the wide world of wellness. Sometimes we talk to experts, sometimes we just talk to each other, but we're always talking to you. And if you want to watch this episode, which we encourage you to do, go to our YouTube channel at EBT Podcast.
Every week we discuss topics from nutrition and exercise to mindfulness and self-care. And guess what? March is National Nutrition Month.
That's right. And so that is exactly why we decided to reach into the archives of Everybody Talks and replay one of our absolute favorite episodes today. When we talk about discovering the power of nutrition, you cannot have that conversation without also talking about personalization, right?
Yes, that's right. And the theme for 2026 is actually discovering the power of nutrition. So it's all about how the food we choose doesn't just fuel us in a general sense, but it impacts our mental state, our immunity, our long-term health in really specific and powerful ways.
Wow.
For a long time, when I studied nutrition, at least, it was this one size fits all. It was a pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Which just recently changed.
Right.
But our guest today talks about kind of the opposite, really, of that. And she's proven, how the human body works and how we can take this personalized approach. So we're bringing this episode back because the science that she talks about, there was a study called the PREDICT study, and how our bodies have this unique blood sugar dip. So she talks about blood sugar management, insulin sensitivity, those kinds of things. And it's really foundational. It's the difference between this generic advice that we used to have with the pyramid to understanding how your own biology actually works.
Wow. And so we dive so much into this one, why two people can eat the same exact muffin and have completely different metabolic reactions. The truth about post-meal inflammation and how your gut microbiome is really, I think we've also learned that a lot in this podcast, is really the secret engine behind all of it.
Yeah, it's connected to everything.
Yeah.
But since this episode originally aired, Zoe scientists have made some changes to one of their products called Daily 30, which I know we've both
tried.
And I really like it, but
really
I want to try
good.
this new one. So the updated formula has kale, green tea, kombucha, freeze-dried raspberries, and goji berries. And they chose those because of their polyphenol content. There's more plant diversity there.
Right.
And supposedly it is delicious. A little sweetness.
Yeah, a little sweetness as opposed to savory.
Yeah.
In addition, they have a free app, which include all kinds of ways to rate the food that you're eating. They have a new processed food risk scale, which is completely new and a very novel classification system. You just have to scan the barcode of any food and it'll tell you, and you'll see its risk. It also, if you snap a photo of any meal, it'll reveal the food score using AI.
Yep.
And there's science. And also you can track your daily progress with personalized scores and habit building streaks. And you can get, better smart food swaps to boost your energy, your mood, your sleep, your gut health, just so you can feel better about the food that you're eating.
Yeah, totally. And Sarah is really at the cutting edge of all of this in this field. She's the lead scientist, nutrition scientist at Zoe. She is a renowned researcher in personalized nutrition. She has 20 years of experience in nutrition science. And like you said, her work primarily focuses on how individual responses to food impact our health, our metabolism, and obviously our weight.
Right. She holds a PhD in nutritional science from King's College London, where she's also a senior lecturer. And her research published in leading scientific journals explores the roles of the gut microbiome, genetics, and lifestyle in shaping dietary responses. At Zoe, she spearheads research initiatives that empower people to understand their unique responses to food for optimal well-being. So to help us wrap up this National Nutrition Month with some serious science, please welcome back to the show, Dr. Sarah Berry. Welcome. We can call you Sarah, right?
Thanks
Just
for
Can we call
being
you Sarah?
Sarah.
All right, not Dr. Barry.
Oh, it's too much of a mouthful.
Thank you so much. So we met you a few months ago, I
Right
guess,
now.
at an event, a Zoe event. That was amazing. And we're so glad that we kind of harassed you and convinced you to come on
I
the
know,
podcast.
so we really appreciate it. But let's start off for like our listeners, more about you, how you got started in this field, what led you to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I now have two hats. I'm a professor in nutritional sciences at King's College London, which is one of the lead universities in the UK in terms of nutrition research. And then I'm also, like you said, the chief scientist at Zoe. And I started out in the world of nutrition quite a long time ago, about 25 years ago. I did my undergraduate degree in physiology, and I became really fascinated by how we can prevent many chronic diseases through diet, through lifestyle. And so I went on to do a master's in nutrition. And as part of that, I was able to do a clinical trial looking at how fat structure impacts our post-meal responses and inflammation, etc. And that got me hooked. I loved running clinical trials. And so I stayed on to do a PhD. I did a postdoc. I got a lectureship post. And here I am 20 something years later as a professor at King's, still researching how food structure, food matrix, fat structure impacts our cardiometabolic health, so our risk of cardiovascular disease and all the kind of metabolic processes that go along with it. And then about 7 years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of very clever people who set up Zoe, which is a science and nutrition company really focusing on personalized responses to food and how to deliver the best advice for everyone's unique biology, as well as the unique way we live our lives as well.
Yeah, we really want to get into that because Lori and I both have the Zoe kits and we haven't used them yet because we were like waiting to talk to you.
We were waiting, I think.
And we also want to document it. We want to do a whole thing with
Yes.
it. But we wanted to talk to you because we opened the box and we were like,
It's very daunting when
there's
you
a
open
lot
that
of stuff
up.
here.
Yeah.
So we need you to walk us through that. But
I also can't wait to find out the results. I mean, how interesting that there's enough mystery involved that there's always something to study. There's always something new to figure out about how food affects you and how also I think that changes as you age, and your reactions are so different.
Yeah, for sure. I guess let's kind of start with, because you touched on this a little bit, like I want to get into the science behind how different people respond differently to the same foods and how has that changed over the years in your research?
Yeah, so I think the first point to pick up on is something you said, Laurie, about how, we're still learning so much. And I think this is because nutrition science, I think, is still in its relative infancy, that we only really started studying the importance of nutrition about 100 years ago, where it was more related to nutritional deficiencies. And so related to things like scurvy that you don't even hear about now, which is a deficiency in vitamin C. But we now live in a food landscape that has changed beyond recognition over the last 50 years. We live in a food landscape that our bodies haven't evolved or haven't caught up with in terms of, how to live in the food landscape that we currently have. So I think it's a really exciting area of research, but it's also really exciting for individuals to, like yourselves, to be continually learning about what we're still learning about. And I think, one of the areas that's particularly interesting for us as nutrition researchers is really now starting to understand that actually we do all respond slightly differently to food, that we are quite unique in how we respond to food. So a really evolving area of research is understanding how not everyone responds the same to a food, to a diet. And I think that that's really important because we've really focused on this kind of one size fits all approach. But we actually need to personalize, and we need to personalize for a number of reasons. We need to personalize because we do all respond so differently, and our research has shown this, depending on our age, depending on our menopause status, depending on our sex, depending on other unique aspects related to our biology, such as our genetics, such as our microbiome, for example. But when we think about personalized nutrition, we also need to think about the fact that in the UK, and it's very similar in the US, we actually hardly follow our guidelines. So less than 1% of the population in the UK or the US follow the core dietary guidelines. And so we need to use personalization to also encourage people to adhere to a healthy diet. And that's really important. And that's where we can deliver advice in a personalized way through apps like Zoe. We can motivate people by delivering in a way that's personalized to how someone lives their life, what their food preferences are, what, their cultural preferences are, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think about personalized nutrition, I think we need to think of the big picture of making sure it's the most effective diet for an individual to improve their health, but making sure first and foremost it's a diet that people can follow and adhere to.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I think, to your point out personalization, I think this whole idea like bio-individuality it's always existed, right? But we sort of never really had a way to follow that. It was always calories in, calories out, or these different ideas of this broad overall sense of this is what you should do, and it's the same for everyone. And it's just not the case. So I find that so interesting. I mean, your research is so interesting, and I love diving into.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting how also it's evolved, like how you're studying nutritional science. I mean, I want to say 40 years ago, I walked into a nutritionist's office to put me on a diet to lose weight, and it was like very broad. It was like no rice, no pasta, no this. You have to eat, write down everything, measure your, certain amount of carbs, certain amount of, whatever it is. And I lost weight, but I really wasn't learning anything. And now I think the focus is so much on learning how these foods affect you, how it affects your metabolism, whether you're burning the fat. You can eat carbs, you can eat those things in a healthy way. It's just interesting how much that's evolved and changed in just a short time.
Yeah. I mean, some of the big,
every 10 years, I think there's a new fad or
totally.
And a lot of it's nonsense, or I call it nutri-nonsense, or if I'm allowed to, nutribolics, meaning, I don't know if you use the term bolics in the US.
We know it.
But also our understanding's changing. So, in the 1990s, there was this big focus on low-fat food. And all that meant was that everyone was then stripping out the fat, but putting loads of sugar and refined carbohydrates in it. Now we know that that isn't actually the best way forward. And so our understanding is evolving so quickly, but our food landscape is evolving even quicker, I think, sometimes than our understanding. But I think we're in a really good place now. I think that generally, we understand as scientists, as nutritionists, what a good diet is. We know that a good diet generally has the same underlying principles for everyone. So, a good amount of fiber, a good amount of plant diversity, a low amount of saturated fat, for example. These principles apply for everyone. Now, where the personalization comes in is where you can optimize it. This isn't for everyone, because some people just need to at least get to those basics where they're not having enough fiber, they're not having enough whole plant-based foods. They're having, the typical American and the typical Brit has 60% of their energy from these unhealthy ultra-processed foods. For those individuals, we just need to start with saying, just even reduce your ultra-processed food intake by 10%, and that will have a huge benefit. For people who are really long way along the journey, that's where I think this optimization comes in around the personalization.
Yeah, for sure. I have a friend who she had been struggling a lot with not only dietary, issues, but or digestive issues, but brain fog and joint pain and all sorts of things that she couldn't really figure out what was going on. All sorts of blood work, trying all these different things, and she literally just kind of stripped it down to basics and went on a completely no processed food. Literally nothing that's in a box, nothing that's in a bag, nothing, everything just whole food. And
that's hard.
It's hard. So hard. It's so hard. And she also, she didn't want to lose a lot of weight either. She's a small person. And so she's like, I have to make sure that I'm still getting enough food and calories in. But the change in her, she's like, I cannot believe just by doing that how much better she feels. Wow. It's incredible. And yes, it is difficult to do because especially living where we live, it's, everything is processed to a certain extent. But sure. But if you could live like that 80% of, the time, it's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think, do you know what I think is incredible that we're now learning about food, about our diets, is actually not just how it impacts our physical health in terms of what we've typically looked at. So our blood cholesterol, our blood pressure, our inflammatory levels, etc. We now know that very quickly food can have an impact on how we feel, on our mood, on our energy levels, on our alertness. And typically in nutrition research, we haven't studied that. You know, in all of the randomized control trials that I do, I want hard biomarkers. You know, I want to look at what's the cholesterol level, what's the blood pressure, none of this like wishy-washy, hey, how do you feel sort of thing. But we are now measuring this. And with the work that we're doing at Zoe, we're asking people, what is your mood level? What is your energy levels? What are your hunger levels? What's your alertness levels? And it's incredible. We can see in as little as a couple of weeks, people improving these when they're switching to a healthier diet. We see it whether it's through supplements we give, whether it's through an overall healthier dietary pattern. And that's actually really, really important because that will motivate people to keep with whatever the dietary program is. And then over a longer period of time, you will see improvements in those hard kind of physical biomarkers, the blood pressure, the cholesterol, the insulin sensitivity, etc. And, you know, there's so much research now emerging showing how food does impact our brain function and how important it is. And I think this is particularly important at times where our brain function is impacted negatively, for example, during the menopause. You know, so during the menopause, we know one of the key symptoms isn't actually hot flashes, which I know people typically talk about. In our research, we see that less than 30% actually experience hot flashes. And this is research in over 70,000 peri and postmenopausal women. We see that the top symptoms are all of these brain related symptoms, you know, the mood, the irritability, the depression, the memory loss, the brain fog. And this is where we also see diet can have a huge impact. So, for example, we see that if you follow a healthy diet, you can actually reduce some of these brain related symptoms by about 35%. So people are feeling better, they're feeling more alert, they have more, you know, clarity, etc. And I think that's something that we need to leverage it to motivate ourselves to make the dietary change.
I think that's so true because people don't necessarily, they only know how they feel, and I think, yes, the biomarkers are super important, but if you really want to measure, if you really want to motivate someone, it's like, well, I want to be able to think more clearly. So do you think that has a lot to do with inflammation? I keep hearing about all these, different issues that people are having related to their diet, and that's causing inflammatory responses with the brain fog and the memory loss and all of that. Do you think that is true?
So we don't fully know yet. And this is what makes it, for me, an exciting area of research, because there's so much we don't know, but probably frustrating for you guys interviewing me that a lot of it's like, we just don't have the answers yet. We do know that there is a relationship between what you eat and your inflammatory levels. We know that they can change in as little as 2 to 3 hours. We've seen this from our own research. We know that if over a period of time you follow an unhealthy, heavily processed diet, you increase your long-term measures of inflammation. We know that impacts lots of areas related to your health, your cardiometabolic health, so your blood pressure, your cholesterol, etc. That will impact your brain function as well. We also know that these foods have a big impact on our gut microbiome that's also related to your inflammatory levels. How that directly links to any of these kind of brain or cognitive effects, we're not 100% sure. I think it's multifactorial. I think that there's lots of different, chemicals that are released from the gut microbes, for example, when we eat certain foods that have favorable or unfavorable effects as well, on different transmitters, etc., that are in our brain. And so it's many different aspects, and it's quite a new area of research.
Okay. And then you throw menopause in there and it just skews everything.
Is there anything that you've discovered that you're just like, what the hell? Like, we didn't even think that this was connected.
So an area that I'm spending a lot of time working on is how we eat. And we typically think about what you eat. We typically think about macronutrients. And, you even said this at the beginning, Laurie, that, you were thinking about, reducing your carbs or your fat. So typically when we think about how a food impacts our health, we think about protein, fat, fiber, carbohydrate. We know that food is so much more than that. We know that a really important factor is all of the other bioactives. So a food on average has 72,000 chemicals. These all impact our body. And these encapsulated within a food matrix, so within a special structure of the food. So the food matrix effect is something I've done quite a bit of research on, and I think that's exciting. But a new area of research that really is exciting, and I think we're going to hear more and more about over the next 10 years or so, is the how we eat. And these are factors like the speed at which you eat your food, the time of the day at which you eat your food, the frequency with which you eat your food, the fast period you have, for example. So the kind of things that we don't typically think about when we think about, oh, how should we eat for best for our health? And, there's research, for example, showing that if you just slow down how quickly you eat your food without even thinking about it, you can reduce your energy intake. So if you just reduce by 20% the speed at which you eat a meal. So let's say you have your breakfast. I don't know, Laurie and Jen, how long would it take you typically to have your breakfast?
Minutes.
Yeah.
Quick.
10 minutes.
Let's
maybe.
be generous. Let's say it's 10 minutes, okay? And if you just increase that by 20%, so to 12 minutes, what the research shows is without even thinking about it, you would subconsciously reduce your energy intake by 15% without even thinking about it. And it's these kind of tools that we have in our toolbox that I think that we can start to use without over worrying. I think, we've got to enjoy food, and it's things like the timing of eating. We know that 30% of people are eating after 9 o'clock, whether it's a main meal or a snack. The point is they're eating after 9 o'clock at night. We know if you're eating after 9 o'clock at night, you wake up the next day more hungry. We know that you're more likely to have a higher BMI. You're more likely to have worse blood cholesterol, worse insulin sensitivity, worse blood pressure, etc. And it's this whole area of how we eat that has really captured my interest, because I think it's so moving away from this very traditional reductionist approach we've taken in nutrition before.
Yeah, I think it helps people to better grasp. I think people can relate to that more. We were actually talking with a nutritionist last night on our wellness call, and she talked about how, chewing your food between 15 and 44 times, depending on, what it is. And no one does that.
No.
And and I didn't realize that stat you just said, 30% of people are eating after 9 p.m. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, I guess that makes sense. You walk around New York City and you see restaurants that are packed at, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night.
And I think, the other thing that we've seen a huge change in is also frequency of eating. So, 50 years ago, we would have just 3 main meals. We'd have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But now we know that a huge proportion of people are grazers. So we see in our own research, and other people have found, that a quarter of our calories, so nearly 25% of our calories, actually come from snacks, and where people on average snack 2.5 times a day. So that means that we're having, instead of like 3 eating events, as we would call it, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we're on average having about 5 to 6 eating events throughout the day. And this is partly because all of this food is easily accessible. In the old days, dare I say it, everything was cooked from scratch. You couldn't just go and quickly, get all of these pre-packaged snacks. They're everywhere now. But it doesn't mean it's bad for you snacking. And we've published some great research looking at how, if you're snacking on healthy foods, and as long as you're not snacking late at night, so as long as you're not one of those 30% of people snacking after 9 o'clock, actually they can make a really healthy contribution to your diet. And actually it can be a really simple single dietary strategy to improve the quality of your diet. Because when we have snacks, we typically choose them ourselves. So I don't know about you, Laurie and Jen, but when it's my dinner is typically dictated by what my fussy kids will eat. My lunch is typically dictated by where I happen to be in London at that point in time. But the snacks that I have, typically I can control. And so, I think this is something that people can embrace rather than worry about, oh my God, I'm snacking, I shouldn't be snacking. We recently published a study at King's where we randomly allocated people to either eat 20% of their energy from typical UK or US snacks, or 20% of their energy from almond nuts. And what we found is those that were having their snacks from almond nuts, we told them have your normal breakfast, lunch, and dinner for both groups. Those who were having their snacks from almond nuts they had a reduction in their blood cholesterol. They had an improvement in insulin sensitivity. They had an improvement in blood vessel function compared to those having typical US, UK snacks. They had an improvement that equated to a 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk. That was just by changing their snacking. So some of the ways in which, it's phenomenal. And this is, some of the ways in which we've changed how we eat, we can actually use to our advantage. We can say, okay, here's a really simple single dietary strategy that we know can improve your overall health.
And did you give them the quantities, I assume, of how much they could snack on the almonds?
Yeah, so what we did is we recruited people who said that they were snackers. So we wanted them to continue with their typical kind of dietary pattern. We said, have your typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Instead of your normal snacks, we want you to have 20% of your energy from almonds. So we worked out what people's energy requirements were. There's equations you can use based on your age, your sex, your BMI, etc. And so we would give them pre-packed amounts of almonds for each day that they could have each day. And then the control group, what we asked them to do is to have a set amount of calories from a control snack that we provided. And we did lots of research working out what's the average US, UK snack and working out the average profile. So it's slightly higher in sugar, higher in saturated fat, higher in salt compared to a typical part of the diet. And we created these mini muffins that we got people to eat, and we gave a certain amount depending on their energy requirements. And so they were kind of representative. If you think of when you go into one of your grocery stores, all of the kind of snack products, imagine kind of putting them all together and mashing them up into a muffin. It was like giving them those. And then we looked at people's health outcomes at the end of the period of time where they're either having the nuts or having these mini muffins representative of snacks. And I mean, that 30% difference in cardiovascular disease risk just from changing the snacks, I think is really powerful because it shows actually you can just make small changes. You don't have to overhaul your entire diet.
Yeah, that's usually the mistake that people make is
yes.
And especially like, the new year starts and you're like, okay, this is it. I'm changing. And you change everything.
Yeah.
And
it
that
doesn't
sets
stick.
you up for failure.
Stay,
I know. It just sets you up for failure. And so just to do a little change, say, okay, I'm not going to have potato chips. I'm going to have these nuts, or I'm going to have, likewise, this nutritionist said something yesterday, which I should do, is she said she took all the vegetables that were in her fridge, put them in a bowl, and that's what she snacked on the whole of the day, and just put it at her desk. And that's such a smart way to A, get the vegetables that you need, and B, to snack more healthily.
I think it's the accessibility, like you were saying, Sarah, like depending on where you are in the city at any given time for lunch, that's going to dictate, what you eat. But I think having those snacks that you choose, is exactly that. You can make those healthier choices and having them available. And that's a big downfall that I think I have, is that I'm never prepared in most situations for anything.
In a lot of situations, she's not prepared. That's
Not
the
just
big
with
difference
food.
between the two of us. But yeah, in food, you're never. I've gone to your house and you're like, okay, do you want to have lunch? And then she'll be like, I only have this.
I don't really know what I have. But kind of back to your point about, studying the way people eat. Have you done any research on like food behaviors and like distracted eating? We talk a lot about that, like not having the TV on or not looking at your phone or not. How does that play in?
Yeah, so this isn't something I've done research myself on. I know that there has been some research on this, not enough research, but it's an area that I think is really important around kind of the mindfulness of eating. And I don't mean mindfulness in the kind of way we think of like wellness, mindfulness, like woo-woo stuff. I mean, just being aware of the fact that you're eating. What am I eating? I have most of my lunches, which I know I shouldn't, whilst I'm on a Zoom call, rushing, mouthfuls between talking, etc. And there is research showing that if you're distracted, you tend to overeat. So there's research showing that if you're eating in front of the TV versus eating, aware of what you're doing, then you actually consume a lot more calories. There's also the evidence around eating in a family setting where it slows down unintentionally your rate of eating because you're stopping between mouthfuls to communicate with other people. So it's slowing down that rate of eating, as well as making you aware that you are at the dinner table and you are eating your food. So I think, we really need to be thinking about how we're eating our food in terms of the actual context in which we're having it, in the environment in which we're having it. And I do think that's quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. And I think that kind of, just in the slowing down, whether it's chewing your food, chewing more, or not being distracted and all those things, it sort of goes hand in hand with then the biological processes that happen as a result of that, right? So if you're slowing down, it's, your brain is like, oh, okay, I'm full now. I can stop. It took me 20 minutes to eat this versus 3. And instead of inhaling your food and not recognizing when you're full, I think that's something that could just help.
And we need time for our fullness signals to tell us we're full.
Yeah. Exactly.
And most of the receptors that detect our fullness, detect the food in our gut, are most heavily concentrated lower down your gastrointestinal tract. So the food has to get there so that it can feed back to your brain and say, hey, Laurie, hey, Jen, you've had enough. If you're wolfing it down like this, the food's not even emptied from your stomach in that time.
Right. That's right.
And that's why, again, sitting, if you're able to, if you have a family, for example, and eating together and slowing it down that way. I mean, there's other strategies you can use to slow down the rate at which you're eating. You can use a small spoon. You can make sure you put your knife and fork down between each mouthful. Or like you said, Jen, you can concentrate on chewing your food more as well.
Mm-hmm. What's my rule?
What's
my rule?
Is what?
That I taught you years ago.
Is to put the fork down.
No.
Oh.
Eat until...
Oh, you're 80% full. Sorry.
Eat until you're 80% full.
Which I have to say, I have mastered.
Yes, you
but
have.
It took a long time to get there.
Because you don't recognize
you don't recognize
when you're 80% full, because either, I mean,
yes,
it's good
and
that you're
you always
enjoying
want
your
to
food, but
enjoy the food, and you want to finish what's on your plate, and that realization that you don't have to finish what's on your plate is a big hurdle to get over. For a lot of people.
But I think too, Sarah, it's not just about, I mean, I'm thinking of it in terms of weight loss right now, just in my mind as you're talking, but it doesn't really have to be about that. It's really about how your digestive system's working. How are you feeling? You're wolfing down food and you don't feel so great after that. But anecdotally, I do see just in my lifetime, just watching how friends eat and different family members, and the people that do eat slower or don't finish their meal. Like I could remember being out with friends and there were like a few of them who were always, they were always slim, they were always lean. The one thing they had in common was that they never finished their entire meal. We were out to dinner and they never finished what was on their plate, all of it, And so anyway, I mean, that's obviously not any hard research there, but but just seeing that, these behaviors do make a difference on
But I think that's a really important one. I was brought up, you finish what's on your plate. You don't leave it. When I go to people's houses for dinner, I think, my gosh, I cannot leave anything. It's like the epitome of rudeness. And often I'm absolutely stuffed. And I think, and I don't want to eat anymore. It might be the most beautiful food in the world. But I was brought up, you finish what's on your plate, you eat what everyone else serves to you. And I think that and it's the same when you go to a restaurant. I always feel, it's very rude, it's very wasteful, I shouldn't do this. But it's really important we listen to our hunger signals. And I think this is where as well, dieting, yo-yo dieting, it totally mucks up your hunger signals. And this is where as well, I think with kids, we need to allow them to listen to their hunger signals. So I let my children decide when they're full, when they're hungry. They're allowed to go and snack. Unfortunately, they snack on too much unhealthy stuff. I'm working on that. I'm not perfect, but it's really important, and I see other people around me who the parents are so like, oh no, you can't have any more. Well, how are they ever going to learn to be able to detect when they're hungry? Our bodies, unless we fiddle with them, our bodies are so clever. They're so clever at telling us when we're full, when we're hungry. We've evolved to be able to do that. The problem we have is we live in a food landscape that is tricking our brains with these heavily processed foods that are soft in texture, that we eat 50% more quickly than the equivalent unprocessed foods that are energy dense. But the other problem is many people do different kind of yo-yo dieting. And that totally changes that set point in our brain of where our brain thinks we're full and where we think we're hungry. And that's going back to a point I said earlier, because we haven't really evolved to this current food landscape, that we've evolved to live in this time of famine. So as soon as we diet, i.e. restrict our calories, our brain is like, whoa, hold on a minute. I'm not getting enough energy. I've got to increase the desire for food, the hunger signals in your brain, so that you'll go out and search for more food. And that's what our bodies have evolved for. So then when we're in this landscape where there's just food everywhere, it's very difficult not to overeat. But I really believe if from the outset, we try and make sure that we enable our children to understand when they're full, when they're hungry, I think we can set them on the right path. Obviously not if they're drinking like sugary drinks all day long, etc., but within a kind of moderately balanced diet.
Yeah.
It's so true what you said. I mean, I've talked about this many times, but yeah, I blame every weight. I've been that yo-yo dieter for most of my life, and I blame it all on that Clean Plate Club, like having to finish everything that I eat. And I don't have children. I ended up not having children, but I always thought if I did, I would do just what you suggested and just say, hey, you want to eat this? You don't like this? You do? Like, just leave it behind, because I never learned that. Like, it drives me bonkers if there's one more bite on my plate, just one. I almost cannot. I mean, now I'm a little different, but like I could not leave that one bite behind. It seems like, well, that's ridiculous. You can eat that one more bite, but that one more bite is the difference between stuffed and just right
satisfied.
Full. Yeah, satisfied.
Yeah.
And not tasting your food. Like, that's
and
the
tasting
thing.
your food and smelling your
if
food.
If you really enjoy food and you go to nice restaurants and you're like kind of a textbook like foodie, I use in weird quotes because I think that I am that, but to really enjoy what you're tasting.
Yeah.
That also is so important.
Yeah. But I think it's funny that you say that too, Sarah, about like being, you're conditioned to this idea of like, well, it's rude if I don't finish that. Or if we were recently over the summer, we were at a restaurant. We went to an omakase restaurant for Lori's birthday. And it was
very fancy
one, very expensive.
Right.
But it was 15 courses.
It was even more.
I
think it was 21 courses, and
it's
delicious.
It's delicious, but you're sitting at the sushi bar. You're sitting there, and they're preparing. He's right there in front of you. And I couldn't. I was like, if I had a paper napkin, I would be spitting this on the side into my napkin so that I could actually eat more, because I feel so rude.
Totally.
Not, and it's beautiful, and the food is beautifully prepared, and
finally we said to him, it's like, okay, really.
I had to tap
out.
I'm like, I can't anymore.
You can't eat one more thing.
I couldn't. I was actually.
We were just like full,
so uncomfortably full. But it's just funny that you say that. I just want to get into Zoe and the testing process and the kinds of data that participants provide to you in order for you to give them these personalized nutrition profiles. What does that look like?
So Zoe, a science nutrition company built around this whole idea that, yes, we respond differently to food, that we can deliver advice also in a personalized way to help people along their health journey. And what we do at Zoe is we start people on a test kit. So there's a 2-week test phase. And as part of this 2-week test phase, you get this lovely yellow box that you've received. And in it, there's a series of different tests that enable us to look at how you metabolize and process food. And there's also access to an app. So you have to sign up to this app that we ask you lots of questions. So we ask you lots of questions around the things that we've been talking about. So around how you eat your food, around your preferences, because obviously if we're going to make any recommendations, we need to make sure it's food that you like. There's no point otherwise. Around the context in which you eat your food, your health history, etc., and your typical dietary patterns. You then start this test kit phase where you are fit on your own body, a continuous glucose monitor. So this is a monitor that you put on your arm that measures your glucose every 5 minutes. So this is your blood sugar levels. So when you eat a carbohydrate containing meal, you have an increase in circulating blood glucose, peaks around 30 minutes after the meal, returns to baseline around 2 hours. And we look at that to look at how you're metabolizing carbohydrates. We also give you a test meal, which you're going to have the pleasure, both of you, of eating. I designed these about 25 years ago as part of my PhD.
No kidding.
They are not a gourmet meal. So, Laurie, I'm a bit worried you're a foodie.
No. Don't be silly. I'll eat anything.
They're there for science, okay? They were designed. They were designed as what we call a metabolic challenge meal. So they're quite high in fat, quite high in carbohydrates, with the intention of kind of pushing your system. So giving you this high carb, high fat load to see how well you metabolize them. They're also dyed blue because we want to look at something called transit time, which is the time it takes from when you eat a food to basically coming out in your poo. So you are going to also, when you've eaten it, you're going to log in the app when you see blue in your poo. And this is because we know your transit time, so how long it takes for the food to go from your mouth to your poo, is related to your gut microbiome health and other health aspects. So once you've eaten this cookie, we'll be looking at how your blood sugar responds from your glucose monitor, but then you will also collect a small blood sample about 6 hours later using this little special kind of suction kit that goes onto the side of your arm. It's pain-free, don't worry. And it sucks out a little bit of blood. That gets shipped off to our lab, and we look at things like your blood cholesterol level, but we also look at something called your blood triglycerides. And this is basically a measure of blood fat. So what happens is when you consume a meal that contains fat, it's absorbed into your blood in the form of triglycerides. So just like carbohydrates is absorbed into your blood as glucose, the fat is absorbed as triglycerides. And what we can look at is how well your body's processing that triglycerides after you've had that high fat meal, because it's quite a high fat breakfast. After you've done that, then what you do is you also do a poo collection. That means that we can look at your microbiome, which is the trillions of bacteria that live in your gut that we know from our own research is really important in relation to your diet. So it can be modulated by diet, but it's also really important in relation to your health. We now know that the gut microbiome plays a really central role in terms of your cardiovascular health, your mental health, your digestive health, and so many other aspects related to health. After you've done that testing, for the rest of the 2 weeks, you'll be wearing your continuous glucose monitor, and we give you different experiments. We get you to try out different ways of eating so that you can learn how food impacts your body. We also get you to consume your typical diet and log the food that you're having. So we can also look at how you respond to the typical kinds of food that you have, what the quality is of your typical diet. After that 2-week test phase, you then will start a series of programs, because we try and educate you as well about all of our learnings. So things that we've been discussing today about how you eat, but also things that might seem obvious to us, but actually aren't as obvious sometimes as we think, like the importance of fiber. Telling people how just increasing your fiber by 5 grams a day can have a huge impact on your health. Talking about, the advantages of fermented food or plant diversity, or increasing the colorfulness of your plate, because different colors in fruits and vegetables, the pigment comes from all of these magical polyphenol chemicals that improve your health. Then after a couple of weeks, you'll get your results back, and these results will tell you basically how well you process the carbohydrate, how well you process the fat, also what your general kind of cardiometabolic health is from your cholesterol and these other factors combined, and your health history. And then you'll also get lots of information back about your microbiome. And so from research we've been doing over the last 7 years at Zoe, we've identified a microbiome signature of what I very loosely call good bugs and bad bugs. If there's any microbiologists listening to this, they'll probably hate that term. Apologies. But it's the simplest way we can describe it. So these are basically species that we know, if they're what I call the good bugs, these are species that we know are associated with healthy diet, but most importantly, healthy measures of health. So lower adiposity, i.e., fat mass, lower inflammation, lower blood pressure, lower blood cholesterol, etc. And then conversely, there's species that we know are associated with a poor diet and unfavorable measures of health. So we'll feed you back information about the healthfulness of your microbiome, what species you have, what species we think you should have more of, and what kind of foods you could eat to encourage more of these, what we call good species. And then you can log your food. daily or however you would like to, you are given a score for each food. So based on all of this information that we collect from your bloods, from your glucose monitor, from your poo, from your health history, we are using research from the 200,000 people that have already done this, that share their data with us as researchers. We use that to build on our understanding of how food impacts our health. So you will get scores for food. So it will say, Laurie, based on your health outcomes, you might scan, I don't know, give me 2 foods that you really like.
Okay. Eggs. I'll do simple, healthy food. Eggs and let's say cottage cheese.
Okay, so you could scan those and it will give you a score for how healthy they are for you based on those results. Now, they're not going to be wildly different, Jen, to what your score is, because, obviously we're not going to say, oh, Laurie, for you, it only scores a 5 and Jen, for you, it scores 100. But it's within a certain range, then we can score how one might be slightly better for, give you a slightly higher score than someone else.
Wow. Is the idea to have a high score in the end? Like,
Yeah.
are they added up and you have
She's
a high
already
score?
competing with me.
It really is like in my nature. Like, I was like, how do I get 100?
So you get food scores. Each food has a score, but then we also score how it comes together as a meal, because we don't eat individual food. Well, we don't live by individual foods. So what you get is an overall meal score, but most importantly, you get an overall day score. And then at the end of the week, you get an overall diet score. And that's what's really important, because, we all have some bad foods. We all have some bad days. We all might have the day where, we have the McDonald's or the chocolate or whatever. That's fine. We don't need to worry about that. And so what you'll also get is an overall score at the end of the week that takes into account the individual foods, but most importantly, the balance of your diet. How much fiber have you had that week? How much plant diversity have you had that week? How much saturated fat have you had? How much ultra processed food have you had? And it takes into account all of that, and then will deliver you an overall score for the week as well.
I like that it's over a 2-week period of time too, because that gives you like a pretty good glimpse, I think, into how a person, versus like a 3-day dietary recall that we used to do back in the day. I like the idea that it's more comprehensive.
But the whole time you're on the program as well, and most people sign up to 12 months, you can be logging your food as much as you want to or don't want to, because the ultimate goal is that you work towards building up your diet score, so your week score every week. So it might be that you start off, that if you were someone that wasn't eating a very good diet, you might start off with a diet score of 40. And then it's, we will in the app say, okay, you're at 40. These are the key elements you need to improve. So we'll give you advice. You're not getting enough fiber, you're not getting enough diversity, but you're doing really well on your, good quality fats, your nuts and your seeds. This is what you need to work on the next week. And then hopefully the next week they might go up to 55, for example. And then, the next month. So eventually, after a certain period of time, their overall diet score is gradually improving.
And so are you just looking at diet? Are they reporting on any other lifestyle factors, exercise, stress levels, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we ask people if they're happy to reflect daily on how they're feeling. And so things like their energy levels, their mood, physical activity, those sorts of things. At the end of the day, this is a user friendly tool. So it's designed with you guys in mind rather than me as the scientist. And so it's sometimes almost frustrating for me, because I want to ask 100 zillion things each day, because that's what we do in science. But actually what's incredible is, as part of when you become a Zoe member, as part of when you buy the program, is you can consent to take part in research. 99% of people consent. All that means is that you're consenting to share your data with me as a researcher, so that I can use it to advance the whole area of nutrition science. We're continually publishing manuscripts in peer-reviewed journals, presenting at conferences, all based on the data that our members are kindly sharing with us. So it's a kind of this two-way, incredible process.
What's the next big study? Like, what are you seeing that is like, oh, we need to look at this that we never looked at before?
Yeah, so we have a gold mine of data. This is, for me as a scientist, it's so exciting. So although, Jen, to the point I was saying earlier, it's not got kind of the granularity that would be like my ideal, we have a gold mine of data on 200,000 people where we got the microbiome, the blood sugar, the blood fat, all of this questionnaire data as well. And going back to a point I made earlier, the questionnaire data about how you feel, your mood, your energy, your hunger. And also, when people are logging their food, they're logging not just what they're eating, the time that they're eating it. And that those sorts of factors that I said are really important. And every time we do any piece of research on this, quite often we'll see some sort of pattern that we hadn't necessarily thought about, but we're like, well, actually, we know a scientist that did a very tightly controlled trial that looked at something similar to that. They found this, or they saw this in mice. Hey, let's go and explore that further in our data. So we published a paper to do with snacking, because that's something I've been interested in at King's. And as part of that analysis, I asked the researcher, oh, could you just go and look at whether timing of snacking is important? Because I did see a paper of someone who showed that if mice were eating late at night, they had, poorer X, Y, and Z. And so just as part of that research, she went and did a deep dive into the timing of eating, of the snacking, which uncovered all of these really interesting results around the 30% that snack late, the worse metabolic health. And so then that throws up, actually, this is something we should do an even deeper dive into. And it's the same with our menopause research. We never set out as a company to delve into the menopause, but as part of some of the work that we were doing, looking at what are the key factors that determines why one person's postprandial glucose, so their post-meal glucose response, is different to another person's. So this is that increase in circulating blood glucose immediately after having a meal. Why are we seeing so much variability? What are the different factors? And when we were trying to look at what the different factors are, yes, we see time of day is important. We see fast periods important. But we also started to see that there were these differences between males and females, but that it was dependent on age. And when we teased it apart, we saw, wow, there's this big difference depending on whether you're pre or postmenopausal. So we kind of stumbled across it. So then we rub our hands together as excited. Right, that's what we're going to look at. And we've got, and the problem is that we have this goal. I mean, there's just too much data and too many exciting things to look at. So my poor team probably hate it every time they get on a call with me, because I'm like, oh my God, I've got this great idea. Let's look at it.
It is, though. It's like one thing leads to the next. It's like this snowball effect, but that is so interesting. And we've only started to talk, I mean, being that I'm perimenopause, Lori is, I don't know, do we say postmenopause anymore? Do we say once you're in menopause, you're in menopause? You're always
I thought
in
menopause was just an event. And
it is. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. But
yeah, so you're post, and so you've got the peri, which is that period leading up to it, and then you've got post, and then you've got a term we often use is the menopause transition that captures the perimenopausal phase, but also those first years postmenopausally as well.
Yes.
Right. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, now that we are the age that we are here, and starting to get more interested in this. It's things that I never really thought about before. And insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance, and how that changes So I love that. I love that you just keep peeling back another layer and peeling back another layer, because it's
it's just fascinating that there's always something more that's like a connection to something else that you never thought of before.
Women's research. It's we're finally, I feel like, maybe you could tell me, getting to a place where women are being studied a bit more than they were in the past. Because it's not the same. We're not the same as men, and obviously you're finding that as well.
Yeah.
I think this is what's exciting with the work we're doing at Zoe, that we have such a huge group of women that we're studying, and women's research has been really underrepresented in the past. 100 years ago, women's bodies were considered atypical, men's were considered typical. And so the focus is on, if we want to look at how a drug or a food impacts our health, we obviously have to look at the norm, i.e. we need to look at men. And actually in the US, women were actually banned from taking part in intervention studies, so in dietary trials, up until 1993. And then there's cost. So up until recently, nearly all of my trials were in men. So I've run about 35 randomized control trials. Until my Zoe research, only a few were in women. They were mainly in men. And that's because if I want to include women in my research, then I have to consider, are they pre, peri, or postmenopausal? I have to consider the stage of their menstrual cycle. So suddenly the cost goes up because I have to recruit more people to study the same research question. And in a funding environment where it's so difficult to get money to do any research, you have to be competitive. And so, as sad as I am to say that I made those choices of, well, in that case, I'll just study men, because it was either that or I didn't get to do it. Now, the tide is changing massively. And I think this is what's really exciting. And the kind of research that we're doing as well is interesting from, if we think about menopause, yes, we're doing lots of research looking at menopause symptoms and how diet helps. That's being talked about a lot. But the other kind of the research that we're doing that hasn't been talked about enough is we know that depending on your menopause status, it changes your risk dramatically of disease. And so we see, for example, before the menopause, women are doing really well. They have lower blood pressure compared to men, lower blood cholesterol, lower visceral adiposity, so fat around the belly, lower inflammation, lower cardiovascular disease risk. Soon as they hit the menopause, then suddenly they catch up with men. And in some cases, like blood pressure, they even overtake men. And we see this really clearly in our own data. And it's really important that we communicate this to women, because I think a lot of women think when they're going through the menopause transition, it's all about symptoms. It's all about the brain fog, the night sweats, etc., which I know are awful. I know it's terrible. It's tough. But actually, there's also this increased risk of cardiovascular disease, of cardiometabolic disease. So it's a really important point of time to kind of take stock as well of our lifestyle, of our diet, in order to try and reduce some of that natural thing that happens with the menopause in terms of our disease risk.
Yeah, definitely. And do you look at or have you studied, some of the interventions, hormone replacement and those kinds of things, and how those, as far as, yes, reducing symptoms, but how the long-term effects of HRT can help improve some of those things as well, cardiovascular risk and all of that?
Yeah, so it's important to say we have not conducted a study that's designed to look at HRT and cardiovascular disease risk. And I just want to say that to be quite cautious, because it's something that, there's different HRTs used by different individuals, different doses, different regimens, etc. What we do see with our own research is that those people who are taking HRT compared to those who are not taking HRT, on average, have lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower visceral adiposity, lower inflammation. And so these are what we call these intermediary risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So you could predict from that they will have lower risk, but we don't look at any endpoints. And really, to answer the question conclusively, you would need to do, a randomized controlled trial where you follow people over a period of time. For this particular research looking at HRT, we've looked at one point in time, and that's where we see that difference. However, there is more and more evidence starting to emerge that HRT does seem to have these additional benefits in terms of our health. I say it with a cautionary note because I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a clinical doctor. But what we do know is that we have estrogen receptors all over our body, all over our brain, hence all of these awful symptoms related to, the neurological symptoms, the brain fog, the memory loss. We have them in nearly every cell. That's why they affect our metabolism. That's why we see, for example, these huge differences in postprandial, so post-meal glucose responses, depending on whether you're pre or postmenopausal. This is why we see differences in bone health and cardiovascular health, etc. So it's kind of logical when you think about the role of estrogen that it does play out in these more, HRT does play out to have a more favorable effect on these health outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. The recent research from Dr. Mosconi, with the brain receptors, that was so amazing to me. Really, really mind blowing. I was like, oh my gosh, I love to dig more into that and understand that better, because I once I read that, I'm thinking, well, that makes sense. But I know, so
and they're the most common symptoms. Those neurological symptoms.
Totally. Sure.
We see in our cohort, and this is in 70,000 individuals. And actually, we've had a couple of different cohorts, so a couple of different groups. We've also had this other group from another cohort we have at Zoe of about 30,000 individuals, and consistently, it's the neurological symptoms that are experienced by 80 or 85% of women. So 80% of women have the brain fog, the mood swings, the memory loss, the irritability, the anxiety. And, it's that traditional way that we've thought of menopause before. And certainly I did. I'm perimenopausal, I'm 47. And I thought, well, I've only had 1 or 2 hot flushes. Maybe I'm not in it, but I don't remember half. I forget everything. I'm grumpy. I wake up often with palpitations. I have these terrible mood swings that my poor kids have to suffer. And it's like, even though I'm, a reasonably intelligent person, this was before I started this menopause research, I was totally unaware. I thought it was just about night sweats. And I think it's so important we get the message about that's the least common one.
Yes, it's so important. That was such a revelation to me. I was so afraid to, start going through menopause, and I'm thinking like, oh God, I'm going to be sweating all the time.
Well, I know she witnessed me going through it. Like, I didn't know any of this. I wish we had started this podcast 10 years ago, by the way, but I didn't know anything. And she watched me, like, I had horrible hot flashes, and that I still get on occasion. But I was like, sweatshirt on, sweatshirt off, sweatshirt
I was
on.
terrified.
She was like watching me
oh
go
my
through
gosh,
this.
Is this going to happen to me? This is miserable.
And I'm like, oh, I can't wait till you have this. I can't wait till
Well,
you
you're so
go through
kind.
this.
Nice
I know,
friend,
aren't I?
right?
Good
Nice
friend, good friend.
And then she was so mad when I'm like,
and
I
then she
had
said
never had a
none.
hot flash.
She said none.
But I have all the other crap that
she
you
has a
just
lot of the
described.
other
I have that
things.
brain fog, that memory loss. It's, and, just connecting those things. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know how, you as a researcher, I would want to like just dive into all of it. There's not enough time in the day to, study all the things.
I was going to say, like, even not being a researcher, just listening to you and these different studies and seeing the correlations between things that I know that I do in my life, that I watch other people do. I watch, friends who raising kids, like all those things.
We think we're experts now. We're like giving all this advice. I'm like, we're still not parents.
We're not parents. We're not doctors.
We're not doctors. I'm like, but we have a lot of advice to give.
But it's so interesting. It's all like, I don't know how you don't work all the time to like, make new connections and figure out new things. It's so fascinating.
I love it though. Or just the things that you experience personally that you're like, oh, I want to study that. I want to know more about that.
I like to connect, just help people connect the dots.
Yeah.
It's all about connecting the dots,
And I think, Laurie and Jen, you make a really important point, how, Laurie, your experience is very different to your experience, Jen. And I think this is something as well we need to empower women to be aware of as well, that it's very easy, it's natural that we compare ourselves to other people, that we assume, oh, what works for them will work for me, or how they experience something I will experience things in the same way. And the reality is with menopause, it's not like that. It's so variable, the symptoms. And so I think we need to be really careful not to assume just because that's what happened to our friend, that's how it's going to be for us. But also just because that's what's worked for our friend, it's going to work for us. We see that there's huge variability in how diet, lifestyle, supplements can impact our menopause symptoms. And we know, for example, that it is actually based on a kind of biological underpinning. So, for example, soy isoflavones, which you might have heard of, these are like phytoestrogens. So these are chemicals that are in soy products that they mimic the action of estrogen. They have the same chemical structure as estrogen. And so people who have a high intake of soy isoflavones, like in East Asia, have a lot lower prevalence of menopause symptoms. But we actually know if you supplement with soy isoflavones, how one person responds is very different to another. And we know this is based on the gut microbiome composition. So some people have species in their gut that enable them to convert these soy isoflavones to a really active form of soy isoflavones that binds really strongly to the estrogen receptor. If you have these species, you will have a 75% greater reduction in your menopause symptoms compared to someone who doesn't have these symptoms when they take isoflavones as a supplement. So, Jen, you could go and get this isoflavone supplement, from, your... Oh, I can't remember what the store. CSV? Is that what it's called? CVS. I took my daughter there when I came to New York when I met you. My daughter loved it. She's 14. Okay, CVS. So, if you go to CVS or whatever and you get a soy isoflavone supplement, you might have these species that are like these super converters. So you might have a real benefit from it. Your friend might not have those species, and your friend might therefore have only a very small benefit. And so it's a case of you have to just listen to what works for you. It's the same with kind of generally diet and nutrition. But I think particularly with the menopause, this is really important because what works for one person isn't going to work for another person.
Yeah, I think that's
Absolutely.
so important, especially with supplementation and things. People ask me all the time, well, what supplement should I take for this? Or what do you think about colostrum? What do you think about collagen? It's like, well, there's a lot of things, but how is it going to work for you? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just lost my train of thought. I was just going to say something and it flew right out of my head. But I was going to say, going back to HRT for a second, and again, this was kind of before I really understood some of this bioindividuality and how much it really makes a difference. And I had been saying, I started HRT 2 years ago, and I lost weight. And so when people come to me and say like, well, I said, oh, you have to try HRT. It helped me lose that menopausal belly and this and that. And it's like, and then a couple of my friends went on, they're like, I haven't lost any weight. I haven't seen any. I'm like, oh, all right. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not working
even more for.
But it's different, but again, to your point, it's just different for everyone. So if I think it's so important to understand, your microbiome and your body and how you respond to things. And everyone is so different, but I'm excited to do.
I know. I'm very excited because just to see the foods, my sensitivities to different foods have changed massively over the past, I would say 5 years, and trying to figure out why I have certain like symptoms like skin issues or gut issues, and to know that it's based in like kind of what I'm eating. I can't wait
to beat your score. Just kidding.
I love it. You need to do a weekly check-in with each other.
Yes, I know.
We will. We'll be, Thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else before we let you go that you
What's on the horizon for Zoe?
Yeah, what's coming up?
So what I would love to mention is our Menoscale calculator, given that we've been talking about menopause. So This is a new online tool that we've developed at Zoe, and it's a tool that allows you to calculate the overall impact that your menopause symptoms are having on you. It's you can find it at zoe.com/Menoscale, and it asks you about the 20 most common symptoms that we know from our own research and other research are the most prevalent symptoms. And then for each symptom, it asks you to grade them on a scale of 0 to 5, how much they impact your quality of life. And then you get a scale a number on a scale of 0 to 100 that tells you what your average Menoscale score is. It also tells you how this compares to other people of a similar age who are on HRT or not on HRT. It also tells you about your top most burdensome symptoms, and again, how that compares to other people. But what's really good about this is that you can do it as frequently as you want. So if you are embarking on HRT or you are embarking on a diet and lifestyle change, you can do this weekly, monthly, however you want to do it, in order to actually see how whatever the intervention or the change you make, how it's impacting your symptoms. And I think that's really important because symptoms are so subjective. It's so difficult to remember, is this better than how I felt yesterday or the week before? So I would like to shout out to the Menoscale. There's also a consent box that you can consent to share your data with me as a researcher. You don't have to. It's all anonymized. I would never know who the data is coming from, but it really enables us to advance research as well. And then next on the horizon, I'm just really excited to dive more into how we eat our food. And also I'm doing a lot of work on food matrix, food structure, which we haven't had time to touch on, but we can do another day.
Yeah, you can come back and we can
come back and talk about that.
Absolutely. There's so much. That's the thing. I mean, I can sit here and talk to you for hours. It's so interesting, and there's just, so much great information that I think needs to get out there. So thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this with us today.
We really appreciate your time today. Dr. Sarah Berry from Zoe. Thank you so much for coming here. So that was like super interesting. Like even I was at rapt attention for the scientific reports.
Yeah. No, I mean the research that she does is just it's like one thing, like we were saying, one thing leads to the next
Right,
thing,
leads
to
to
the
the
next thing,
next.
and you just want to know more and more and more. But I love how she's focusing more on women now, and she admittedly was like,
I know.
Like
Like
but I
she
get
did
it.
it.
There's-
Like
there's
she was like, okay, it was like cheaper, it was easier.
Right.
I could get it approved, and then I could do my
right.
work.
People weren't funding
Yeah.
research on women because it was too complicated. But
I
no,
know.
she's great, and I'm glad that we met her.
I know.
When we did,
And we're
so
gonna try our Zoe kits.
try our Zoe kits. Stay tuned for that.
Yes.
I didn't know about the whole like collecting of the poop.
I kind of remember that. Yeah.
I do. I remember it, but like I thought like you just poop in a thing and you send it. Like she's like, you only send a portion of it. How are you
send it-
parsing
it's
it
like-
out?
There's like a
Gross.
little tweezery thing.
Ew.
I know that is not in your wheelhouse to do.
Not at all. Like I want to know the results, but I don't want to do the thing. Like, ugh,
Yeah. I know.
nasty. But
All
I'll
for
do it.
science.
I'll do it in the
For
name of
science.
science. I'll do it for Sarah Berry, Dr. Sarah Berry. I will do
Exactly.
it. Yeah. So anyway,
Hope you like that one. I really did.
Yeah, me too.
This is Lori Schulweiss.
and I'm Jen Giammo.
This was Everybody Talks.
Talk to you next time.
Take care.
For more information about our podcast, to learn more about us, or to catch up on all of our episodes, go to our website at everybody.talks.podcast.com.
Follow us on Instagram at Shirley, at Jen Giammo, and at Everybody Talks. And if you want to watch today's episode, go to our YouTube channel at Everybody Talks Podcast.
If you want to be a part of the conversation, join the Everybody Talks community and become an exclusive member of our wellness group. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more.
Don't forget, if you like what you've heard, give us a 5-star rating, write a review, and tell a friend. We're for everybody and everybody. The Everybody Talks podcast is co-created, executive produced, and hosted by us, Lori Schulweiss and Jen Giammo. Produced and edited by Station 16.
Our theme song music is written and performed by Jackie Ryle and Aaron Navisi, with additional support from our pups, Oliver, Milo, Murray, and Frankie.
Talk to you next time.